thank you so much for clicking on to this video. I just want to first say a humongous thank you to everyone who commented and told me how much they enjoyed my first video, whether it was on social media or texting me. You know, I appreciate it more than you will ever know. I cannot believe that I have 88 subscribers within 24 hours of posting my first video. That's just crazy to me. I could not do any of it without your support, so please know that you are just absolutely appreciated, and I'm so grateful for you. Next, I want to say I look a hot mess. My hair is all over the place, my makeup's half on, and if you know me personally, you know that I never wear a full face of makeup without false lashes. But I could not find my glue. It is 1 o'clock in the morning. It is pouring rain outside. I wanted to start and get this filmed before it started storming because it's supposed to storm later. So just bear with me. I highly suggest that you watch part 1 first. I'll have that link in the description box below. I would not recommend watching this without watching the first part, just because you will see a lot of spoilers. And lastly, before we get started, I just want to invite you to subscribe to my channel, like this video, comment. I want to interact with you because I'd love to pick your brains and know what you're thinking. I want to know if you liked the length of the last video or if you prefer shorter videos. Also, I planned on doing another short series of videos on a case that is from Alabama, but I post on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and this one's going up on Tuesday, and this upcoming Saturday I am in a wedding. So I'm thinking about posting just a short, you know, Halloween themed video, a true crime event, you know, maybe based around Halloween or something of that sort. So what are your thoughts? Do you think that's a good idea? Do you want me to just go ahead and put out a longer video? Let me know. Without further ado, let's get started on the finale of this 2-part series, the bizarre and tragic case of Holly Bobo. In this video, we will be covering a lot, so just get ready for the ride. So before we get started talking about this next part of the Holly Bobo case, let's just kind of very briefly recap who we have incarcerated thus far on this case. So first we have Dylan Adams, who was already in prison for unrelated gun charges. He, possibly in hopes of getting a plea deal for the current charges that he's facing, tells the police that his brother, Zach Adams, was the one who kidnapped, raped, and killed Holly Bobo. Remember, Dylan Adams makes this incredibly huge statement, and this testimony, you know, completely changes the case. This was the case's first big break. Let's not forget, though, that Dylan Adams does have some intellectual issues, and he has a very low IQ. A lot of people believe that he was possibly coerced by the police. He will later on say that that happened. You know, take it for what it's worth. Again, I'm all about facts here. I'm not giving an opinion. So just know that that is something that Dylan now claims. He claims that the police coerced him. Dylan admits that Zach is the one that did most of the work. However, he also incriminates Jason Autry and Shane Austin in his testimony. Shane Austin was a friend of Zach and Dylan Adams, and he was allegedly the creepy man that Holly's friend Candace reported to the police that was creeping and looking at Holly and Candace a few days prior to Holly's disappearance. Now again, I can't say if it was him or not. The photo that they sketched up, you know, it has similarities, but there are also things that don't look like him. Like Zach has a large scar on his face and the sketch does not. Shane completely denies his involvement in this case. Then we have Jason Autry. He's a 40-something-year-old man who was a known drug addict, and he allegedly was the one to help Zach hide the body. The majority of the last video was Jason's testimony against Zach in court, so I'm not going to give the entire testimony again, but just know I will be referring to parts of that testimony. And then finally, we have Zach Adams. Now, Zach is a very interesting character. He has a rap sheet a mile long of just different charges, including domestic violence, gun charges, drug charges, you name it, he has allegedly done it. Zach's mother and stepfather actually had a protection order against him at the time of this crime. Zach's stepfather says that when Zach was 19 years old, they were at home and it was his mother, him, and the stepfather. Now the stepfather is the one that tells the story. He says that Zach and his mother were arguing and the stepfather just got kind of tired of it and walked into the other room. That's when he said he heard a gunshot and walked back into the room and saw where Zach had shot his mother point blank in the knee. Now Zach's mother sat on the gun because she, quote, did not want her son to go to jail. Zach's stepfather also says that had he not been home, that Zach would have just let his mother die. Zach's stepfather says he doesn't necessarily think that just because he felt like he was a danger to society and to him, that Zach committed this crime against Holly. He says he went into the trial with an open mind and was looking for evidence to make him feel one way or the other about it. Zach's mother, on the other hand, feels like Zach is innocent and would not budge unless she saw evidence that completely swayed her to believe that Holly was murdered by Zach. In the last video, I also mentioned the Piercy brothers, which they were the ones who were charged with tampering with evidence because a friend of theirs came forward and said that she saw a video of a woman who was blonde and looked like Holly Bobo tied up. So they were charged with tampering of evidence. Now, it's not really clear why the charges against the Piercy brothers were dropped. However, I believe that it's because they could not find the video, therefore they probably did not have enough to hold them. Let's keep in mind the prosecution did not have a whole lot of evidence against those that were charged. The prosecution is seeking the death penalty. You would think that because of the fact they were seeking the death penalty, that the prosecution would have a lot of solid evidence, forensic-based evidence. And you would think that they would be able to provide that evidence and get the ball rolling on this trial. However, that's not exactly the case. Now, the evidence that the prosecution does have against Zach, Dylan, Jason, and Shane is circumstantial evidence. There's no proof, there's no DNA matching them to the case. Whenever they went to look for evidence, they went hard in Zach Adams' home. They took pieces of his wall, pieces of his flooring, they destroyed his home looking for evidence. So it's not for a lack of trying, it's just a lack of finding it. No, that doesn't mean it's their fault. That doesn't mean it's not their fault. There's just no DNA evidence found. Evidence that they do have. I mentioned in the first video the Facebook post on Zach's Facebook. I made a mistake. The first post was made the day that Holly disappeared. And that was the post that said the following.
"You never was, you stupid whore."
The second post that was found, which is the following.
"Who am I looking for?" Attached is a photo of himself wearing all camouflage.
Was actually posted in December. So that was my bad. I made a mistake. So just know that it was not two that one day. It was one that day and then one later on in December. The Facebook posts were part of the prosecution's evidence. And then of course, Dylan's confession, if you will, that was part of the prosecution's evidence. However, we have to keep in mind that Dylan and Zach did not get along. They were not on good terms. They had mutual friends and they both did drugs together. So a lot of people think that they were close and that's not true. So a lot of people say that they believe that Dylan was just trying to throw Zach under the bus and get himself out of prison at the same time. So he attempted to make a deal, I believe. I don't know that to be certain, and that's not even an opinion. That's just kind of like the only thing that makes sense to me of why out of nowhere he would just say, hey, this is happening. My brother had to do this with the Holly Bobo case. So I believe he was trying to maybe make a plea deal or an immunity deal or some kind of sweetheart deal to get out of prison on the unrelated drug charges. And also, it could have actually been coercion. I want to keep, all possibilities open. When you watch the Brendan Dassey case from Making a Murderer, when you watch that case, he has a very low IQ as well. And I personally believe that he was coerced in a lot of ways. Does that mean I think that yes, he did it, or no, he did not? Not necessarily. I just think that a lot of information was pulled out of him. Now, there's no video of Dylan giving his testimony that I can find. However, we have to keep an open mind, and it's very much possible that the testimony that he gave was coerced. Another piece of evidence that they had was that Holly's body was found in between the Bobo home and Zach Adams' home. The media reported that it was found in the backyard, that it was right there. That's not true. Just because it was 4 or 5 miles away does not necessarily mean it was in your backyard. Like, 4 or 5 miles away from me is a whole completely different city. So I don't really necessarily know why the media reported that, but it's not true. I mean, it's true that the body was found 4 or 5 miles away from the Adams home, but it's not true that it was in their, quote, backyard. Of course, we have Jason Autry's testimony. That was the biggest piece of evidence. He was essentially the prosecution's star witness in the Zach Adams trial. He incriminated himself, which, a lot of people think, oh, well, they definitely must be guilty if he incriminated himself. That's not necessarily true. However, his testimony was incredibly vivid and matched a lot of what ended up happening later on when the body was found. It ended up matching his testimony. I want to take a second to break away from talking about the perpetrators and the evidence and talk about the town. The town of Darden and its surrounding city Parsons, the entire Decatur County, all came together so much for Holly Bobo. They spent countless hours looking for her, immediately after it happened, and also months and even years after. They had t-shirts, they had posters, they had water bottles. They collected water bottles and bought the little paper part that goes around it and put that on the bottles. They had a humongous reward to bring her home, whether it be safely or, bring justice for Holly by finding out who did this. So the Bobo family had a lot of support, thankfully. One day, a search party was out looking for Holly, and a man came across a bag. Now, he went a little bit closer to the bag, picked up a stick, and kind of pushed it around, and he noticed that it was a lunchbox. The lunchbox had an H on it, and he kind of pried it open with that stick and saw that there was a sandwich in there. Just a few miles north of that lunchbox, a pair of pink Calvin Klein female underwear were found. And the last piece of physical evidence that related back to Holly was a piece of paper with her name on it. Now, this was found across the street from Shane Austin's neighbor's home. Later on, the police discover a gun in the back of a pond that is around Shane Austin's property. They believe this was the gun that was used to shoot and kill Holly. And of course, we have the remains of Holly Bobo. The teeth that they found matched with her dental records, and they were able to prove that it was her. Along with all of that, there were also a lot of people who came forward because Zach Adams could not keep his mouth shut. He was complaining about Dylan telling everyone, but he's the one that had 10 people testify against him in court as witnesses, saying that he confessed to them what he did. And that is the prosecution's evidence. Now, they are seeking the death penalty for allegedly a few of Holly's items found around the woods in between Holly Bobo's home and Zach Adams' home, a piece of paper across the street from Shane Austin's home, her remains, which were found, but there were no DNA of the boys on any of the remains, and then of course the testimonies of both Jason and Dylan. That, along with the confessions of the 10 people, was really all that the prosecution had against these men. All 4 boys were to be tried separately, so I'm going to talk about each of them individually. But before I get started talking about the 4 boys' trials, I do want to talk a little bit about leading up to the trials. Before they had their trials, each man had an indictment hearing, and then they had a second indictment hearing. There were so many indictment hearings because a lot of charges changed throughout this trial process. The defense attorney said that they thought that the prosecution was doing this strategically to keep the men behind bars. So they have all these indictment hearings, and throughout this process, the defense just requests to know the evidence that the prosecution has, and they're supposed to provide that for them. The prosecution really just kept filing charges, dropping charges, changing the indictments. The prosecution was just really not forthcoming with their evidence at all. The defense kept filing for discovery of motions one after the other, just trying to find out what the prosecution had. The defense stated they were ready for trial. Anytime, anywhere, any place, they were ready for trial. Second indictment hearing, a lot of people just felt like the defense was being really rude, and I kind of get it. After wanting to start this trial and, find out what they had on their clients, I can see how the defense would be a little bit annoyed. And with the prosecution not being forthcoming with evidence, yet the news reporting the prosecution's evidence, I can see how that would irritate the defense. At the second indictment hearing, the defense actually said, I saw a news article on the forensic DNA testing of the blood found, but I haven't received that yet. So obviously the prosecution was doing these things over and over again, filing charges, dropping charges. The judge actually scolds both the prosecution and the defense, saying, you really are not making any progress. The defense really filed so many discovery motions that I don't really feel like the judge was necessarily talking to them, but kind of had to address it as a whole to not call the prosecution out. This was so bad, it lasted over a year. The prosecution and defense just kept going at each other. The TBI that was involved in the case actually backed out of the case because the prosecution was acting so badly and they got into an argument. So they brought in a special prosecutor and the TBI actually rejoined the case. After a year, the defense files a contempt of court charge against the prosecution because they still have not given them evidence. Now, I know what you're thinking, who cares? The guys are in jail, the prosecution and defense, they're doing their jobs, whatever. Now, you may feel that way, but you're not thinking about Holly's family if you feel that way. Holly's family had to be there for every indictment hearing. Every time a prosecutor would add a charge or take a charge away, anytime that new evidence was supposedly going to be presented and wasn't, they had to be there to see if maybe the prosecution was going to get ready and get the ball rolling on this case. Now, the judge made a comment that did not sit well with me, and I was listening to a podcast about this case before I even decided to make this channel, and I remember this comment from that podcast. The judge said, due to the death penalty being on the table, we need a heightened sense of scrutiny on this case. Don't we always need a heightened sense of scrutiny when it comes to the law, when it comes to trials? That makes me feel like they don't expect a higher level of scrutiny on cases such as life without the possibility of parole. Like, oh, well, we're not killing you, so if we're wrong, oops. That's kind of how it felt. Now, that's the one time I'm gonna let my opinion slip, and that's not really to do with the prosecution or the defense. That's just my opinion on a comment that the judge made. And I understand that they are trying to really make sure that they have what they need before they take this thing to trial, because they want to convict these men of this crime and there's not a lot of DNA evidence. However, I feel like the judge probably should not have made that comment. That makes me as a citizen worry that what if I get wrongly charged with a crime and the judge doesn't expect prosecution, defense, or jury to have a heightened sense of scrutiny on my case because I'm not up for the death penalty, but I still end up with life in prison for a crime I didn't commit. That's just kind of my thoughts on that. But anyways, so now let's talk about each individual man and their trial. So we'll start with Shane Austin. Now, Shane cut a deal with the prosecution. He said that he would help find the body of Holly Bobo if he could get immunity. Although he was still saying he was not involved at all, I'm assuming his attorney probably pushed him to get immunity anyways. Shane was supposed to help find the body and get immunity. However, the prosecution ended up saying that they could not give him immunity because he was not, quote, honest and forthcoming. I don't know if that meant he just was going to take them to the body but then could not find it, or if maybe he just lied about something. This was before Holly's remains were found, because remember, they weren't found until late 2014, and all of the boys were arrested in early of 2014. Now, Shane denied any involvement, so when they tried to break the deal by saying he wasn't honest and forthcoming, he and his attorney attempted to sue them to avoid being arrested. So they were getting ready to get Shane charged and tried for this case, and on February 22nd of 2015, in a Florida hotel room, Shane Austin was found hanged. It was ruled a suicide. Why he was in Florida, no one really knows. The defense attorney just gave a statement saying that Shane was, quote, broken up about this. Also, keep in mind that Shane denied any involvement. But now there are three. The fourth person, who is going to be a help to the prosecution, is no longer alive. I know this had to be a major setback for the prosecution, because he was one of the four that was a co-conspirator who was willing to testify against the others for immunity, or willing to help find a body for immunity, in which he did not find it. So I know that the prosecution at this point was probably pretty frustrated. That's maybe another reason why the indictments changed so many times. People are quick to say that Shane committed suicide because he was guilty. We don't know that for sure. His attorney said he just felt broken up about being involved in this trial. He said he had no involvement and that he felt a lot of pressure. So it's possible that it was just pressure of this whole case. You know, there were already 3 men arrested with the death penalty hanging over their head. So next we'll start with the big trial. This was the trial of Zach Adams. The trial lasted 17 days and then the jury deliberated for 11 hours. So obviously I can't go into every single detail of the entire 17 days, but I can give you kind of the big overview. The trial did not happen until September of 2017, so it was a full 6 years and some change since Holly went missing. And just to prove to you that grief never goes away, when Holly's mother Karen was called to the witness statement on the first day, she passed out and felt like she could not breathe once she started identifying Holly's belongings. I already mentioned the Facebook post, which were used against Zach as evidence, along with Jason Autry's testimony, Dylan Adams' testimony. But along with that, the prosecution had 10 witnesses come forward and say that Zach in some way, shape, or form confessed to this crime to them. And one was a known drug dealer. This known drug dealer, Richard Densmore, came forward and was like, yeah, I mean, he told me he did this. Another one was Zach Adams' ex-girlfriend. Now, she is also a drug addict, so most of these people involved are, so take this for what you will. And on top of that, Rebecca also kind of had, you know, a little something against Zach because Zach was abusive towards her. So please know all of these statements are alleged. Rebecca Earp says that the day of Holly Bobo's disappearance, Zach came home and he told her about Holly Bobo disappearing. They ended up getting into an argument and he told her that she was going to end up like Holly Bobo. They eventually broke up a couple of months later. She had been trying to break up with him for a long time because he was abusive towards her, but she never quite got away until that following July of 2011. Most of the prosecution's evidence against Zach was presented through these witnesses and through the testimonies. Other than that, the only evidence that they had was they had some crime scene photos and obviously Holly's remains. The 2 men that discovered Holly's remains came up and gave their statements to the jury, along with specialists. Now, Zach was initially charged with aggravated kidnap and first-degree murder. After 17 days, 11 hours deliberating, the jury came forward with a verdict. Before I give you this verdict, I want to say that the death penalty at that point was taken off of the table. I've seen articles where the Bobos made that decision. I've seen articles where the prosecution and the defense both made that decision. And then I've seen it where the jury made that decision. So I'm not exactly sure. I do know later on that Karen is glad that they were not charging with the death penalty because she was able to move on with her family. Zach Adams was found guilty on all counts of kidnapping and murder of Holly Bobo. He will spend his life in prison. In one of the most powerful moments of a trial that I've ever seen, Karen Bobo directly speaks to Zach. And she is so strong because I don't think I ever would have been able to do this. She went to the witness stand and commanded that he looked at her in the eyes. She made people that were blocking their view of one another move out of the way, and she commanded that he look at her anytime she was speaking to him. Now, she told him that although her life will never be the same because Holly is the first thing she thinks about when she wakes up and the last thing that she thinks about when she goes to bed, she will finally have some peace knowing that he will be locked away. She called him an animal and told him that Holly was so full of life and he took that from her. I am going to put a link in the description of that clip because it is so moving and so powerful. If I wasn't afraid of a copyright strike, I would put it in the video myself. The following October, which was again 2017, Zach Adams' defense team files an appeal. They felt like the trial should have been moved further away from the county that the murder took place in. They felt like it was too high profile of a case to have been locally tried. And they also felt like the prosecution did not have enough to charge Zach with life without the possibility of parole. The most recent update of Zach Adams is in October of 2019. That was when the transcripts were finalized from the trial of Zach Adams that happened in 2017. These transcripts, now that they're finally done, they're going to be able to move forward with the appeal. That is supposed to go to the 3-state appellate court sometime in late 2020. Now let's go to Jason Autry because his trial is kind of connected to Zach Adams' trial because Jason never quite had a trial. He made a plea deal with prosecution to testify against Zach Adams that would give him immunity. Since there is potentially going to be a new trial for Zach Adams, Jason Autry is not going anywhere. The immunity agreement does not kick in and therefore he will not be released from prison until the legal process of Zach Adams' trial is completely over. Now, he was in prison at the time of Zach Adams' trial already for 8 years for an unrelated federal gun charge. Those years have been served and are completely up, yet he is not going anywhere. In 2014, Jason Autry said, "I did not bother that girl in no form or fashion." Obviously, in 2017, in his testimony, he does say that he was there when Zach shot and killed Holly, along with helping move the body. He then went on to say, "I did not kidnap or rape Holly. However, I did lie about the involvement that I had." He is currently incarcerated at the Riverbend Maximum Security Prison. Lastly, let's talk about Dylan Adams. Dylan Adams had no trial as well. However, on January 22nd of 2017, he went to court and gave an Alford plea, or some people refer to it as a best interest plea. Now, what that means is that he is maintaining that he is not guilty, but says that it's in his best interest if he admits guilt. He will serve 35 years for facilitating a kidnap and especially aggravated kidnapping. His sentence will run concurrent. 3 out of 4 of the men involved in this case are currently behind bars, and one of them, as we know, took his own life. The most recent interviews of the Bobo family that I can find were in 2017 after Dylan Adams' plea. Now, Karen comes forward and she speaks and says that just because Dylan entered an Alford plea does not mean he's not guilty. She says that guilty is guilty. Someone from the press asked her, how is she doing currently, and did the trial's ending give her any closure? She says that there's no such thing as closure in an experience like this. Holly is the last thing she thinks about when she goes to bed and the first thing she thinks about when she wakes up in the morning. I'm sure she wonders what kind of person Holly would be 8 years later. She would probably be a nurse. She possibly would be married to her boyfriend Drew, maybe even have some children. Unfortunately, because of 4 men, she will never be able to live her life. A strip of highway around where Holly lives is now called the Holly Bobo Memorial Highway. She has her own fund, her own memorial fund, the Holly Bobo Memorial Scholarship Fund. I'm gonna put a link in that description, and I really highly suggest you to donate if you feel led. It helps kids get scholarships for school. Although true crime is fun to discuss and to research and to listen to, let's not forget that at the end of the day, someone lost their life. A family lost their daughter, their sister, their friend, their girlfriend, their niece, their cousin. They lost someone that they loved. There's still a huge hole in a lot of people's hearts. Let's not forget that Holly Bobo was a person. She wasn't just someone we discuss in a story. She was a human being whose life was cut short because 4 men chose to let the evil inside of them come out. I'm gonna leave you with this. It is a quote that Holly's friend made.
I believe if we were all a little bit more like Holly, the world might not be so dull. Her beautiful smile, one-of-a-kind voice, and giggly personality were what made her. You didn't get much better than Holly. Holly left behind a beautiful legacy. She was a person of love, faith, intelligence, and talent. In her short time here on Earth, she affected so many. She was sweet, funny, and had a beautiful voice and a personality to match. Her story is a reminder of the richness of a life well lived, regardless of the amount of time between birth and death. I just hope that she can be remembered as the great person that she was and not the victim that she became.
Thank you so much for watching this video. My hair has gotten worse as the time has gone on. My makeup has gotten worse. I appreciate you for sticking around, and I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know what you think in the comments. And again, please consider donating to Holly's Memorial Fund. I'm sure that there are students across the country that could and do benefit greatly from this scholarship fund. Again, thank you so much for the love that you've shown me just in the last 48 hours. I appreciate it more than you will ever know, and I hope that you guys have a fantastic day. I will hopefully see you guys in my next video. The next one will probably be a shorter Halloween themed video, and then after that it will be a couple of more long videos that are in a series of a story that happened in Alabama that is pretty interesting. Thank you guys again so much. Feel free to subscribe. Again, comment down below. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this case, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.